You're listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday, July 8th, 2022. I'm not going to lie. I thought last week's episode was going to be like, oh, it's just, for us at least, it was a chill, comfortable conversation. Actually generated a lot more discourse than I was expecting. People throwing back at me that the movie should be called Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, despite the fact that I argued that it is not a Rescue Rangers movie. Check Twitter. There was a lot of interesting discussion and ideas.
I mean, you know, in a world where everything's a controversy, we choose the battles that we feel we can win.
The point is, everyone here, at for all intents and purposes, we all agree that the people that disagree with Dan are wrong. So let's just go ahead and move on.
We don't actually believe that.
We can keep it going if we want to. We'll see what happens when we get there. The point is this: Darkwing Duck is actually just Disney's version of Inspector Gadget. Moving on. Speaking of...
Oh, I have to quit the show after that comment. I'm teasing. Let's move on.
Speaking of taking things in new and wild and interesting and perhaps controversial directions, this week we want to talk about a movie that is new-ish.
Well, new as of May, so it's...
Right.
You know,
it's
cutting
summer
edge-ish.
Indeed. We're going to talk about Doctor Strange. I think I had a problem with this last week. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Mm-hmm. I did not say Doctor Who, right?
No, you did.
Good. Ever since that happened, like on the recording, I've been making that mistake every time I bring it up, and it's very embarrassing. But Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, the second Doctor Strange movie. And this is, I think, an interesting movie to discuss, considering today, I believe, officially, the fourth Thor movie comes out, right? Thor Love and Thunder. Is that the fourth?
Yeah.
I always have to remember, did the second one come out or not? Despite, according to Endgame, it's the most important movie of the MCU.
I mean, like, what? Sorry. What a claim that Endgame made.
Right. Notice the Russo brothers haven't come back. But no, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, it's the newest entry until this week into phase 4, phase 5. What phase are we in? Do we know of the MCU?
I think 4.
I think it's 4.
Yeah. Although that's like arguably, what does that even mean anymore? But yeah.
I have seen a lot of discussion about this current phase, how it's kind of scattered, kind of not as focused as previous phases have been, which makes sense. Endgame did kind of put a punctuation mark at the end of that sentence, right? I think because of that, a lot of the stuff that's come out during this phase, and I think it technically starts with as far back as the early Disney Plus shows like WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, Black Widow, not a Disney Plus show, but you know what I mean. Although I feel like Black Widow actually has more continuity in terms of continuity with the previous phase. I don't know where it falls. But Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness firmly falls within this current phase, and it follows the trend of being very different and being very divisive between fans for a variety of reasons.
It's out on Disney Plus, which means I watched it.
Congratulations.
Which is why we're here to talk about it. Because Lord knows I'm not going to a theater. And let's just start. Holy shit, it's a Sam Raimi movie.
I think it's a Sam Raimi movie featuring Marvel characters, not an MCU movie that happens to be directed by Sam Raimi.
For those that don't know, we are both, in our own ways, fans of Sam Raimi and his work.
Heck yes.
And he has some stylistic features.
I definitely come from the Evil Dead side of his oeuvre, right? Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness.
Well, good, because that's relevant today.
Well, I should also say I'm also a big fan of, and this is before I even knew who Sam Raimi was, big fan of Darkman. I even liked his sort of more recent forays into horror. Drag Me to Hell, I think, was the big one that he directed. But he's also been in the producer's chair for a lot of horror movies, including a remake of Evil Dead, which I actually heard is very good. But then there's a completely different side to his career. He kind of reminds me of like George Miller, the Mad Max guy, who has like all his Mad Max movies, but then he's got Happy Feet, the Dancing Penguin movie, and Babe, the Talking Pig movie. It's a very bizarre career. And Sam Raimi is very similar because, yes, we have all these horror movies, slapstick horror comedies, who knows what they are. But then we have where your roots are firmly planted in terms of Sam Raimi fandom, which is his TV work.
Right. So I came to Sam Raimi from his work as, I think, mostly a producer.
Right.
On the fantasy television shows Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, and Xena, Warrior Princess.
Whoa. Don't forget Cleopatra 2525 and Jack of All Trades.
Jack of All Trades. I was trying to remember what's the actual title.
I know, it took me a second there.
But he also, he also did the Spider-Man movies, right? Which is
I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
part of like that weird, like he does a lot of different stuff. But let's be honest, Doctor Strange, if you were to tag any of these things as like, yeah, it feels like that, it'd be his original claim to fame. Doctor Strange was a Sam Raimi movie in the context of Evil Dead, at least for me.
Oh, I would completely agree. Absolutely. It's a horror movie,
right? Like it is, like weird zombie shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a fantasy horror movie. It's
right. Which is not knowing, like when you sit down to watch this, you're like, oh, let's watch this new Doctor Strange movie. Especially if you've seen the previous, which was just Iron Man with magic. Now it's like, oh, it's Iron Man with magic. And then within like 10 minutes, you're like, well, what? Brr.
It's arguable that up until this movie was released, the best Doctor Strange movie was Infinity War.
Right. Not unfair.
And you alluded to it before, is that what makes a Sam Raimi movie isn't that it's just a fantasy horror movie, which in that area it succeeds wildly. Like, let's talk the zombie Doctor Strange, complete with his cape of hands. Like, dude, that's the most beautiful, disgusting thing I've seen on screen in a long, long time. But you can tell that it made sense to him.
Well, and the way that zombie, like the way he looked, felt like it crawled out of a Sam Raimi movie.
Right? Dead by Dawn.
Right? Real quick, disappointed Ted Raimi was not in the film.
Right. Well, I mean, luckily another mainstay appeared in the most important scene in the movie. Bruce Campbell was in the movie. He had an Evil Dead moment, if I remember correctly, right? His scene in the movie.
Yeah, punching his hand. Although, like, remind me that there's a really a cutting commentary about that role, but...
Not only does it have that fantasy horror stuff, or that slapstick or comedic horror stuff, anything horror adjacent kind of is what he is known for, but also, like you alluded to earlier, like he has a style, and that's cinematic, that's
trashy. I'm sorry.
Compositional.
I'm sorry. I say trashy in the most positive way I can.
Well, like pulpy, I guess, right? And
you're right.
Much like George Lucas ostensibly made classy pulp, adventure, and sci-fi, shorts. Sam Raimi is like, what tradition I'm pulling from? I'm going to make movies that are firmly rooted in like low budget B horror movies that played in second rate theaters as a double feature, right? Just to keep the doors open. Like that's what he's pulling from. That's the stuff that created his cinematic literacy,
his oeuvre.
Yeah, and so that's his language. Much like Lucas did, they're not the same. Sam Raimi's not a bajillionaire.
But no one buys Evil Dead toys.
But he's mainstreaming stuff that was considered low art. And I think that's really important to notice. And to the fact that not only did he define one of Marvel's main superheroes with the first 3 Spider-Man movies, with that in mind, they gave him opportunity to do it again with a different character. That's bizarre. And speaks to, you could say, again, it's debatable, the quality of his work. I don't think that what is debatable is he a good director or not? I think generally he is, but people have been debating the quality of this movie.
Oh, of course. And I would say there's a lot to debate or discuss. But yeah, I think very much so that he brought his, one could say, trashy style. But I actually think it's not trashy. It's actually like this artful recognition of pulp horror from long, long ago, coupled with what he's used to doing. This definitely was not just any pulp horror. It was pulp horror done in the style of Evil Dead.
I think that tradition comes out of a sort of an economy that he was forced to work with when he started, right? his early work stands as monuments to do-it-yourself-ness, right? And like he's trying to do these fancy camera work and this fancy special effects, but he's got no budget and no guide, and so he just made it up. A good example of this is there's like a camera move that the Evil Dead movies are known for, which is like this low camera racing forward, like it's kind of like a POV shot of this camera just racing through the woods towards a character or towards what I believe cabin.
Leverage calls it ninja zoom.
There we go. It's representing in his movie sort of the evil that's surrounding the characters. It's like it's sped up footage. Nothing stands in its way. Now, they had to do that physically because they had no other means to do it. And those early movies really established how he approaches movies. He's very hands-on, very much a kind of figure out how to get it done. It's interesting to see that brought over to a movie that actually has a budget and having the resources and tools to actually do the things he was trying to do and succeeded doing in his original movies, but actually kind of probably having them manifest more fully to how he envisioned them versus what he was actually able to do back in the day. Again, he already did that to some extent with the Spider-Man movies, but to a much fuller extent with Doctor Strange.
Well, because, I mean, clearly in this film, he was allowed to not only do a superhero movie, but also do one that was thematically in the wheelhouse he'd already established. Right. Imagine, watching Spider-Man and like, oh, look, that's, an Evil Dead thing. Like, that would have been weird. But now he can do it. Right, like it makes sense because it's Marvel horror film. And
especially in the context of the premise of this movie, the multiverse aspect, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit. Like he can do anything. Mm-hmm. And so, the change.
And they did.
Yeah. But I guess what I totally forgot to say that sort of, as you call it, the ninja zoom, that Evil Dead zoom shot that he was known for in those Evil Dead movies, he used that to great effect in this movie as well. And so, the Sam Raimi-ness of it, with that as one example of many examples, is front and center in this movie. Perhaps more than the fact that it's the next entry in the MCU canon.
But it's also the next entry in the MCU canon.
Right.
Which, in that regard, is...
I guess, is it?
Well, it's like...
Honestly, so I think we're kind of getting into... We're getting into sort of the controversy here is that I think there was a split in the conversation about it. I think Sam Raimi fans loved this movie. Marvel fans, like MCU fans who are devoted to what comes next, what are the cameos, that kind of stuff, and like how does this add to the story that's going on overall, I don't know if they enjoyed this movie as much. And I've heard as much from friends of mine that are just diehard MCU fans. They're like, it's fine. And they try to put it somewhere along, like, is it in my top 10? And it isn't for a lot of MCU fans. Because of, I would argue, the fact that they lean more into the Sam Raimi aspect of it and it being a playground for him than being although we don't know. We'll see kind of what they can take with what happens in this movie and how they use it in the future. Because there are opportunities to use the plot of this movie for future storylines. A lot of fans I know feel like it didn't push the MCU story forward far enough or as much as they wanted it to go.
I mean, like that is tough. And I get that. And I have my frustrations with the film. I really do. Mostly because, spoiler alert, I guess if we haven't already said it, although I think we did. I'm frustrated that Wanda Maximoff was just the villain. Mm-hmm. Just because, and I know, a lot of the backstory and a lot of the whatever, I've seen all the shows and I know what they're pulling from, but I was frustrated that, her take was, no, she's actually just the worst person and arguably unredeemable at this point, right? Oh no, you literally were willing to murder infinities of you to do this. That was frustrating. So I get that, that's frustrating, but that's not a Sam Raimi choice. That's a big Marvel choice, right?
I think that they do weave some pathos in there, though, where she does address sort of the sexism of revenge.
Oh, of course. And yes.
And I'm glad they addressed that. I don't know. I wish they kind of maybe that threaded through the story a bit more. I think that they said that and they said, okay, we got that out of the way. And let's make her be a mega badass, scary villain, right? And they do a good job with that. She is horrifying.
Right. Right? I mean, she's the worst. Which is a weird take from... She was the okay guy in this movie. And, WandaVision, like, yeah, what she did. And I think actually the real hard take was WandaVision ended with this idea of, oh, she done fucked up, but she learned.
Right.
And apparently what she learned was how to do bad harder.
Right. We saw a little bit. I guess that was insinuated in the post-credit sequence of the final episode of WandaVision where she's sitting there with the Darkhold. I don't think that 5-second or 10-second wordless scene was enough to go to establish the premise of what happens in this movie.
Right.
It feels like someone skipped a bunch of steps on the stairway. That maybe they needed a couple more movies to get Wanda to that place. But as a horror villain, she was awesome.
Oh, she was great. Like she was horrible. She was awful. And that's always a weird thing where it's like, oh, here's this character. She's so great. She's the hero of this story, or she was, right? She was, or at least she was all right in what Civil War. Like she was. It's just that weird thing where you're like, oh, you done lead hard into villain, right? Like
right.
You're so villain that like it makes me uncomfortable how villain you are in this movie, right? Because she was like, I'm gonna wreck your shit, right. Or actually, not even your shit. She's gonna wreck her own shit across dimensions.
Yeah, I think that I like that the motivation for her doing that I think does pay off with her, and kind of where it ties in with WandaVision with her finally getting to her kids. Again, spoilers. At the end, I think that scene is actually really powerful and really well done. But I think that maybe speaks more to Elizabeth Olsen's acting and ability and connection with that character than anything else. Because she has the self-sacrifice turn at the end, which is probably the right move. Right?
Oh, sure. And if they bring her back, which I assume they will, because she's a character, it'll be that weird thing of like, yeah, you did the self-sacrifice, but well,
honestly, it's very Dark Phoenix going to the comic story,
back
right?
into your favorite.
No. I'm talking about the comic. Well, I mean, honestly, this is what the movie does too. But the comic specifically, because they had the space and time to build the character, that it's this character that got godlike powers, and due to abuse and well, no, it's just abuse. She turns on humanity and destroys planets with civilizations and shit on there. And
Wanda destroys universes, right?
Literally, right? The conclusion to the Dark Phoenix saga is that she comes out of it through the help of the X-Men, and she realizes right, and they're fighting this big battle, and they're fighting it to see whether she should be basically put on trial or not, and the fight becomes her trial. It gets to a point she's like, no, like I can't control this power that is inside me. Basically, I need to. The only way to end this is self-sacrifice. It reminded me a lot of Dark Phoenix, and much like the cinematic adaptations of that storyline. As with WandaVision, I think that it goes from zero to catastrophe a little too fast, right? If we think of WandaVision, or honestly as Infinity War as the starting point, and the end point, we could have used like one or two more movies in between to really establish that turn, or some other. So, at least a discussion in another show. Right. But let's talk about the Star Trek of it all. And by that, I mean, this is the Multiverse of Madness, right?
Oh, that was fun. That was all fun. I actually love Benedict Cumberbatch playing other versions of himself. But also, I loved the big scene. I awkwardly tried to sing the X-Men theme. But the fucking movie did.
Yeah,
the movie did. In fact, if you watch on Disney Plus, the subtitle says 90s X-Men theme.
Well, no, it says X-Men 93, 94.
Or whatever,
it's whatever the revived animated series is titled. That's going to be airing on Disney Plus.
When he rolls in, it's like
yeah.
Right?
So let's talk cameos, I guess.
I like that this is a good way to just like throw all that shit out there, like all these cameos, all these like, let's have people doing parts that we're never going to resolve.
Captain Carter, Oh my god.
Yeah. Oh
my
great.
god.
I mean, she already did it in the animated show, but to see her do it in real was like, yes. In fact, part of me is like, why did you only get an animated show, right?
right.
Man, bringing Anson Mount as Black Bolt, which, I mean, really, the big reveal was that a bunch of Star Trek fans are like, wait, you played this part in that shitty series that no one watched? And he's like, yes.
I mean, the reason why he died in this movie is clearly he didn't have the ability to sign a multi-movie contract because he has another show he was dedicated to. That's why they didn't let him talk. He's like, that's one of the requirements he has with Paramount. It's like, you can't say any lines in any other movie.
Well, actually, he did a lot of work on his hand gestures, like his sign. Like, there was work done on that.
Right.
Or, just everything about that. The cameo, Patrick Stewart, like rolling in a wheelchair that is clearly
looked uncomfortable as sin. Oh my god!
Of course, because that chair did in the animated series.
No, it looked more comfortable. It was the chair in the animated series was large and like no one else would have been able to fit in the room anyway. But yeah, like it was interesting. And we got the fan cast of John Krasinski, the odd guy from The Office, as Mr. Fantastic.
And that's a big apparently question mark now in the air. Is he going to play him again? Which, that's fine. I don't care.
The thing that impressed me about that whole scene, right? The meeting of the Illuminati is what we're talking about, if you've seen the movie. Hopefully you have. I was really impressed with how much time was given to that scene and how much backstory and how everything... I thought it was just been like, kind of like Mortal Kombat Annihilation. It's like, look at this character, look at that character, right? We're just kind of running through stuff and they don't really have anything to do. But even like Charles Xavier had like a very, very pivotal moment that... killed him, but it was pretty interesting. We got to see how a different universe worked through Thanos, for example, right? And that was cool.
And it was like, it wasn't like, it felt like it was not just a cameo of like, oh, here's the person. It was like, no, we're gonna have them here, and also develop them a little bit, to the point where you could bring them back, right? Like, I could believe any of them. I mean, we talked about what's his name is Fantastic Four man, Reed Richards, but like
you got everything wrong there.
Sorry.
John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards.
Man, I give zero shits about the Fantastic Four. Like my least favorite superhero anything ever. But anyway, they could bring him back, right? They could, they now have. All these other like, oh, that's a way to do it.
But it wasn't cheap, right? Like you said, like they designed that whole animated series floating chair for Charles Xavier. Black Bolt's costume is not the one that was from the series. It was new. Like one thing, like he didn't have the hat helmet thing in the TV show, movie, whatever it was. But I even looked at side-by-side shots. Like they designed a new costume for him for this one movie. I'm like, come on, what? You're working too hard.
Well, the other Captain Marvel as well. It's that fun thing of it's a throwaway. Like this could be a one-off. We could mine it later, but we at least put the work into it for the one-off where you believe it.
Yeah.
You believe it, right? Like you believe that this is another universe's versions of these characters, right? And if we never see them again, good times.
I like the pragmatism of it too, meaning that I like that they do their best to explain kind of how it works, which kind of reminded me of Star Trek. It's like, hey, they try to figure out a reason and try to find the logic of it as much as you can have in a multiverse kind of situation. And I think that opens up the discussion for a really interesting character with America Chavez.
Oh, sorry. I just actually really loved their presentation of her, the way that they handled her.
It's one of those situations that the Marvel Studios has done really well, where they've taken a character that I've seen in comics, I've seen in like games. I'm like, oh, okay, she punches and stars come out of her hand. Like, that's cool, good for you. I have zero context nor interest in that character, But in the context of this movie, we're like, oh, she's actually pretty fucking rad. All right, this is dope. And with an interesting, complex backstory that plays into the multiverse angle of it, but also really grounds her as a character. It makes her really relatable as a character.
And to me, more that I want to see what they could do with her, whether it be a series or part of someone else's story. Like, I like the idea that they present that character in that context, and I liked it enough to see it again.
What is interesting about it is that they cast and the character, and this is a requirement of the character, is that they cast a young actress in it. And that's one thing that I think we can talk about with regard to the overall phase of this phase of the MCU, which is like they're casting a lot of young actors and actresses and they're doing a really good job of setting up all these young characters to the point where, like, I want to see what they do next. We're seeing that with Ms. Marvel.
Yes.
Right? We're seeing that with America Chavez. I think we have Riri Williams as Ironheart. Is that what she's called? I think that's coming.
Yes.
We got She-Hulk, but that's not necessarily a young character.
Well, she's not young.
They're all younger than us, Andrew. So yes, they're young characters.
No, stop. Don't. Well, arguably, if it happens, Wanda's kids,
sure,
boy 1 and boy 2,
right, Tweedledee,
but they have actors that clearly because the same actors brought back. And also there was at least a little tease in Captain America and the Winter Soldier, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where they have the character that becomes, again, I think these are all young Avengers, but like they're finding young actors that they can then churn, because you imagine they will, right? They'll be like, hey, young actor, do you like playing this part? You're 20, want to do this for 10 years? Yeah. Which is like, I get that. I get that Marvel wants people committed forever. But like, finding people to say like, hey, will you play this part for 8 to 10 years? Like, I get that. And I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm interested in and that makes me more optimistic for the future of the MCU is that, again, as people talk about this phase, they're saying that Marvel is kind of just like flailing about, nothing's really connecting, it feels like they don't know what they're doing. The one thing we can say is that they're kind of laying groundwork for change by introducing, they're introducing these new characters in very grounded and interesting ways. Everything from obviously the incredible success of Ms. Marvel to what they did with Falcon becoming Captain America. I think they did that really, really well. How they're kind of just putting Doctor Strange into a very interesting and new sort of position amongst all the superheroes with what he endured through this film, right? I think we're seeing things kind of coagulate in a new kind of in a new pattern that can be a good jumping off point. And so I'm glad they're taking the time to lay down these, or to plant these seeds, for lack of a better word, so that things can grow out of it. They're actually taking the time to build and grow and change. And that's cool. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, because if you think forward, like, I feel that could be what She-Hulk is doing as well.
Yeah. No, good point. Establishing this idea of passing torches and establishing new characters, which, I mean, there's a weird thing where the comic books don't need to do this because
they don't age.
It's just drawings, right? Like there's no restriction.
Just drawings. You better take one step back.
Oh, you know what I mean, right? Like the fact that Batman was introduced in the 30s and we're still
35,
drawing,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas like with the MCU, they have to acknowledge that like these fucking actors get older or want to move on.
Yeah.
And because of that, like it's given some expediency to the idea of legacies and finding new characters. Which actually I prefer. Like I want to see characters fulfill their arc and then disappear, right? Like be done.
Right, and we spent some time really talking about the appeal of legacy characters and the like.
I mean, I don't know if Natalie Portman's going to be playing Thor in the future, but I don't know. I suspect she won't because she's Natalie Portman.
Right? She's like, yeah, this is fun, but this Oscar I have is telling me that I've got other avenues to travel.
But like that's a good point, right? Like where Chris Hemsworth, right? Like Chris Hemsworth, like he's been playing Thor, great. But his characters had an arc, a story, development, and if the actor wants to keep playing it, that's fine. But also they've established if we want to have this character, here's now an alternative. Here is the new
Jane
Thor.
Foster.
Yeah, Jane Foster's Thor. But I think, like, I'm glad they're trying this, right? I'm glad they're doing it. We've, as the actors grow old and shit, I don't want to see Superman ad infinitum. I don't want to see this, redoing Captain America every 10 years. Like, no, like, acknowledge it moves on. So I'm excited.
I think the last thing I want to talk about briefly is that this is just the next entry into a very popular trend of multiverses, right? We talked about how this handles the multiverse. But like we've got Spider-Man No Way Home, which also was a kind of a cameo fest, but a much more focused one, right?
Right.
And we also have other movies like, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, no, that's a different discussion for a different time, that movie.
The point being that the multiverse is hot, Andrew.
It is.
And it makes me wonder, and maybe this is something to spend more time thinking about and even do research on, is like, why now? Well, we can make an easy assessment as to why do we want to talk about other universes.
Because big money want to make it happen. Right, like...
or just escape anything but this reality.
Oh, fair enough, too. I think there's something about... Because Marvel's had multiverses forever. DC's done it. Why is it now... I mean, and honestly, like the CW DC shows have been jerking the multiverse. I mean, they did their Infinite Crisis, But I think, like, there is this idea that people are more accepting of it for whatever the reason, right? Like, people are now better equipped at that idea. Like, they've seen enough bullshit, whatever fantasy shows or whatever. Like, it's easier to accept than it was before. Right. And maybe there's reasons because our universe sucks. Like, I don't know. But I do think that, like, it is definitely a more present thing that we see.
So just final assessment, blanket statements. What did you think? As I know you're like a fan of the MCU kind of idea more than I am. Walking away from Doctor Who and the multi-TARDIS of Daleks, what did you think of it? What was your just overall impression as the movie came to a close?
It was fun. It's fun. My only dirty comment was I saw someone make this reference to, in fact, actually Bruce Campbell's scene at the end, where if you don't know, Bruce Campbell played Pizza Papa in Marvel in Universe 838, I believe.
Right.
And Doctor Strange curses him to punch himself forever or whatever.
Something, yeah.
Or for some long time. And of course, it's Bruce Campbell, so him punching himself is par for the course.
Shout out. Yeah.
Right. But the post credits was him finally stopping. He says, "Oh, is it done?" And I've seen people actually comment on that, like, "Woof, that's my takeaway for the film." Like, is it done?
Oof, oof.
And I laughed because I've seen multiple people make that comment, like, "Oof." Bruce Campbell's commentary in the post credits was my response to the film. And I kind of like that. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I like the movie, but I like that people that didn't like the movie thought Bruce Campbell summarized their feelings. Like, sure, that's fine. It's okay not to like things,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm more of a Sam Raimi fan than an MCU fan. I enjoyed it for what it is. It is a dark movie. I don't know when I'm going to see it again because it is dark. But I'll probably cut this out. But like the music fight, I thought was genius.
What a great idea! Like,
well, and in a surround sound situation, like they did everything right. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Admittedly, that took me. I was kind of outside the film, just looking at it as like a craft. I'm like, this is something that comes out of a sketchbook or like a random comment shouted out during a writer's meeting or something like that. And then they made it happen. It's really well done.
And actually, I forgot about that, but now that you mentioned it, that actually was... Maybe, again, I come from this as not a movie person, but it's like a gamer.
Sure.
I'm like, that's the best thing ever. Because
Right.
I want to imagine I play role-playing games where that happens. They made a movie of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone rolled a 20 on that and fucking made it happen.
So
anyway, yeah, I don't want to get off on another tangent, but there's lots to like in this, but there's also admittedly stuff that I can understand people not liking. But you know what? That doesn't mean it's a shit movie. It doesn't mean it's the perfect movie. It means it's a movie, and if you like it, that's great. If you don't, that's great. There's other movies that are coming out that we can also talk about.
Right.
Starting with today, I guess, with Thor or Tor. Love and Thunder.
No.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well at our respective handles. On Twitter, you can find Andrew at ProfoundDark tweeting about tabletop role-playing games for the most part. And you can find me at dbethel. You can also find us on Instagram. You can find Andrew at ProfoundBrick and me and my work at dbethelcomics.
While you're at our website for allintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you may already be on because you're listening to us there. Because we now have the whole podcast on YouTube.
Well,
if
not
you're
the whole podcast.
Like and subscribe. Oh, not the whole podcast. Sorry, the most recent episodes.
There we go.
But if you're there, like and subscribe, ring the bell, as they say in the business, because we'll become big YouTubers.
Yeah, it's us. That's the next step, the next pillar of our business plan.
As we fail forward.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4, and they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license.
If you like the show and want to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their respective storefront and leaving some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. All right, you have to choose right now. No thought, gut reaction, go, Andrew. You have to choose one or the other. There's no in between. Love or thunder, go.
I mean, love. Like, I don't want thunder. It's scary.
I'm all about thunder. Oh, yeah, that's right. I would choose thunder, but then I'm like, my dog would be very scared and sad. Shit, I guess I have to choose. Damn it, I have to choose love.
Oh, man. Love for all.
And you know what? We want to know what you think, dear listeners. Go to our Facebook page and answer the poll.
Are you going to poll for this?
I'm gonna make a poll for this. Why not, Andrew?
You monster.
Love or thunder, dear listeners, let us know, and we'll talk about it. The results next week. Sure. Yes, I am going to do that. This is going to be genius. So until you make a decision, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
And for all loves and thunders is...
for all loves... That's bullshit.
That's bullshit.
That's bullshit. That's the
new. Is that your new segment? You're listening to the 14th source for all geeky...
But, like, that's a good point, right? Like, where... what's his name? God damn it.
Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic.
No. Sorry, I realize that, like, my weird Northwestern instinct is to say Thor is both Tor and Thor, because Tor is apparently how it's said in
Norse. Yes.
In Norse, right? Like,
but we're not speaking Norse.
Well, because there are
English
people in the Northwest named Tor, and I had to learn that. So I was like, oh, that. In fact, as an attorney, side story, it was always the, oh, is that judge named Thor? They're like, no, it's Tor. Like, okay.
So TNG introduced the Cardassians, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, O.J. Simpson's trial did, but you know.
Oh my God.